Marcus had lived a quiet, lonely life, but the letter in his hand shattered the stillness. It was from a daughter he'd never known existed. Marcus Turner, a retired widower, had spent most of his life burdened by mistakes and regrets, haunted by the empty house that was once filled with the laughter of a family he'd never fully appreciated. Now, in his late 60s, the only company he had was his own reflection, staring back at him from the dusty mirror. He had never imagined he'd hear from anyone beyond the occasional neighbour or distant relative, but the letter in his hand, stamped with an unfamiliar return address, told a different story. The letter. It was brief but powerful. His daughter. A name he'd never heard before. Lila Hart. She was reaching out, saying she wanted to meet him. She had a child, a baby boy named Elliot. The words in the letter were polite, guarded, but the request was clear. She wanted to connect. And for Marcus, it felt like an opportunity to undo decades of regret. Before we dive deeper into their meeting, be sure to watch till the end of the video, where the true emotional weight of their encounter unfolds. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more stories about family, redemption, and second chances. Trust us, you won't want to miss what comes next. Lila, on the other hand, had always been independent. Raised by her mother, she'd spent years building a life that was cautious, self-reliant, and above all, free from the shadow of her estranged father. When the letter arrived, it didn't stir excitement or curiosity. It brought a rush of confusion and apprehension. Why now? What had changed in his life that made him reach out? She had her own life now, with a young son, Elliot, to care for. A life that was busy, but calm. She wasn't sure what she was looking for in a man who had been absent for so long, but when she thought about her son, she realized it wasn't just about her. It was about him too. Could a connection with Marcus offer her child something she had never had? A relationship with a grandfather? After much deliberation, she agreed. But she wasn't walking into this blind. She wasn't sure who the man behind the letter would be. The first meeting. The cafe was small, with tables close enough that you could hear every whisper, every awkward pause. Lila arrived first, her son, Elliot, bundled in a stroller beside her. The moment she sat down, her eyes darted to the door with every passing moment. She wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting. Marcus walked in just as the clock struck noon, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright sunlight streaming through the cafe window. His hair had grayed, his back was slightly hunched, but his eyes, the same blue eyes that Lila had seen in photos, scanned the room for her. When their eyes met, an uncomfortable silence fell between them. "Hi," Lila said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hi," Marcus replied, awkwardly extending a hand. She shook it, unsure of what else to say. There was so much they needed to talk about, but in that moment, neither of them knew where to begin. The days that followed were tentative and slow. Marcus wasn't sure how to navigate this newfound relationship. The years of absence hung between him and Lila like an invisible wall. Every conversation felt like it was balancing on a tightrope, fragile and delicate, ready to snap at any moment. But he was determined to try. This was his chance, however small, to build something from the wreckage of his past. Lila agreed to let him visit her apartment, a decision that felt both generous and guarded. She didn't know him, and she didn't owe him anything. But for some reason she allowed it, maybe for her son's sake, or perhaps because, deep down, she wanted to see if there was a chance to reconnect. The apartment was small but cozy, decorated with a careful mix of modern furniture and family photos. It wasn't lavish, but it felt lived in, a space filled with the everyday chaos of raising a child. Lila moved with ease, her movements purposeful as she took Elliot out of his stroller and set him down to play. Marcus observed quietly from the corner, feeling like an outsider in a world he didn't know. Elliot, with his chubby cheeks and innocent eyes, seemed oblivious to the tension in the room. He giggled as he played with his toys, unaware that his grandfather was watching him, a stranger to the boy, even though they shared the same blood. It was a bitter realization for Marcus. He had missed so much of Lila's life, and now he would likely miss much of his grandson's too. "So, how's work?" Marcus asked, trying to find something normal to talk about, something to bridge the gap between them. Lila paused before answering, her gaze flicking briefly to Elliot, who was busy stacking blocks on the floor. "It's good. Busy. I'm a project manager for a design firm, and it keeps me on my toes. But it's good. I like it." "Sounds like you've built a good life for yourself." Marcus said it with genuine pride, though it was mixed with a trace of regret. He had always been too absorbed in his own struggles to be there for Lila. Now, looking around her apartment, he couldn't help but think that maybe he had missed his chance to be part of the life she'd created. Lila gave a tight-lipped smile but didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. She knew he was proud of her, and she knew he also felt the weight of the years lost. It was unspoken, but understood. Marcus tried not to focus on the feeling of inadequacy that seemed to wash over him every time he was in her presence. He could tell she was holding back, not fully opening up to him. And he couldn't blame her. It was hard to trust someone who had been absent for so long. When he saw the way Lila interacted with Elliot, tender and patient, he couldn't help but wonder if he could have done more for her as a father. He wasn't sure what he expected. Some grand gesture of forgiveness or a fast-tracked bond. Instead, it was slow, deliberate, and laced with caution on both sides. Over time, Marcus began to visit more often, always respecting Lila's boundaries. He would bring small gifts for Elliot, a teddy bear or a set of colourful books, and each time he felt a small shift, like a door creaking open just a little wider. But the path ahead was still unclear. All Marcus knew for certain was that for the first time in years, he was trying, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start something new. It had been weeks since Marcus began spending time with Lila and Elliot. Slowly, the awkward silences between them seemed to soften, but there was still an unspoken distance, a gap neither of them could quite bridge. Lila was trying, Marcus could see that, but there was something about her that still felt distant, like she was holding a piece of herself back. It was on a quiet afternoon that the revelation came. Lila had been going through her late mother Claire's things, organising a box of old letters and photos her mom had left behind. Claire had passed away a few years ago, and while Lila had kept many of her mother's belongings, she hadn't felt ready to go through everything until now. As she flipped through a stack of yellowed envelopes, one in particular caught her eye. It wasn't addressed to her, but her curiosity pulled her in. The handwriting was familiar, though she couldn't place it right away. It was from someone named Henry. As she opened it carefully, her breath caught when she read the first line. The letter was from Henry, a man who had been a close friend of Marcus's in the past, someone Lila had heard about only in passing. But as she read further, her heart began to race. The letter was full of emotions and confessions, words that she could barely understand. It spoke of a secret, an affair that had occurred many years ago, an affair between her mother, Claire, and Marcus's friend, Henry. Lila's hands shook as she read the words that she never expected to find. "I never meant to hurt you, Claire, but the time we spent together was something I will always regret. Marcus is my friend, and I can't keep this secret from him any longer." The weight of the letter settled in her chest, and the room felt suddenly too small. Lila sat back, overwhelmed, trying to process what she had just uncovered. Her mother had kept this secret for so long, and now it felt like a new kind of betrayal. Lila wasn't sure how to react. The betrayal wasn't just toward Marcus, it was toward her too. She had grown up hearing about her father's flaws and mistakes, but never about the ones Claire had kept hidden. When Lila met with Marcus the next day, her mind was still reeling. She hadn't told him about the letter yet. How could she? She had no idea what kind of response she would get. Would he even believe it? After all, Marcus had always spoken highly of his friendship with Henry, and he had no idea what had happened between them all those years ago. Lila had learned to hold her emotions close, but this news was something she couldn't ignore. It had the power to shake everything Marcus thought he knew about his past. As she sat across from him, she could see the lines of worry on his face. He had started to open up to her, and she didn't want to hurt him. But the truth was, sitting in the pit of her stomach, heavy and undeniable. For now, all she could do was wait, unsure of how to bring it up, without breaking everything they had slowly started to build. The secret was a bomb waiting to go off, and no matter how hard Lila tried to keep the pieces together, she knew the truth couldn't stay buried for long. The truth of the letter weighed heavily on Marcus, its impact settling over him like a storm cloud he couldn't shake. He had never suspected that anything was wrong between his old friend Henry and his late wife Claire. To think that their close bond had been built on such a fragile foundation, where betrayal quietly lingered, left Marcus feeling dizzy with confusion. That evening, after Lila had gone to bed, Marcus sat alone in his study. The letter from Henry sat on the desk before him, the ink still fresh in his mind. His hands gripped the edge of the desk as he stared at the paper. The temptation to call Henry was overwhelming, but Marcus knew he couldn't keep putting it off. He needed clarity, even if it meant facing a truth that might unravel everything he thought he knew. It wasn't long before Marcus made the call. The ringing on the other end seemed to echo through the silence of his home. When Henry finally answered, Marcus's throat tightened, making the words come out more harshly than he intended. "Henry," Marcus began, trying to steady his voice. "I need to talk to you about something from the past." There was a pause on the other end. Marcus could almost hear Henry weighing his words before he spoke. "What's this about, Marcus? You sound serious." "It's about Claire," Marcus said. The words felt strange on his tongue, like they didn't belong. "I found a letter. From you. It's about the affair you had with her." The line was quiet, but Marcus could feel Henry's guilt hanging in the air, thick and suffocating. Finally, Henry spoke, his voice low. "I didn't want you to find out this way, Marcus. But yes, it's true. There was something between Claire and me before you two got serious. It was brief, nothing like what you might think." Marcus's mind raced. He had always known that he and Claire hadn't started out as the perfect couple. There were times when things had felt uncertain. But the thought of Claire being with someone else before their relationship had even become serious was something he hadn't considered. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus asked, his voice betraying a mix of hurt and frustration. "We were friends. Why keep it from me all these years?" Henry sighed, the sound of a man caught in a past he couldn't undo. "I never knew how to bring it up. It happened before you and Claire were deeply involved. And after you two got serious, I just thought it was best to leave it behind. I never meant to hurt you, Marcus. But I should have said something." The weight of Henry's confession left Marcus reeling. The pain wasn't just from the affair. It was the realization that his friendship with Henry had been built on a lie that had been kept in the shadows for too long. And now, after all these years, Marcus had to decide what to do with this knowledge. The betrayal stung deeply, but Marcus knew he couldn't act out of anger. He had always been impulsive in the past, reacting to things without thinking them through. This time, though, he needed to reflect, to process what he had learned before making any decisions. The emotions swirling inside him were too raw, too confusing to confront head-on. "I need some time, Henry," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady but strained. "I can't talk about this right now. I'll call you when I'm ready." As he hung up the phone, Marcus felt an unfamiliar calm wash over him. For once, he chose silence over reaction. He would take the time to think, to decide how this new reality fit into the life he had built and the relationship he was now trying to rebuild with Lila. But as the weight of the secret settled deeper into his heart, he couldn't help but wonder how it would change everything, and if he would ever truly understand why Claire had kept it from him for so long. The days that followed Marcus's conversation with Henry were filled with a quiet tension. He still hadn't fully processed the weight of the secret, but one thing had become clear. He couldn't let the past consume him. He had spent so much of his life looking back, dwelling on mistakes, regrets, and things beyond his control. It was time to focus on the present, on what he could still build with the people who mattered most. One afternoon, Lila invited Marcus over to her apartment. This time, there was no formal reason or specific agenda. It was simply a visit, a chance to talk, to spend time together. As soon as Marcus walked through the door, he saw Lila sitting on the couch, Elliot curled up beside her with a picture book. The sight brought a sense of peace that Marcus hadn't felt in a long time. Lila looked up, giving him a soft smile. "I thought we could have a little break from all the awkwardness," she said with a hint of humour in her voice. "Just us. No heavy topics, just a chance to relax." Marcus nodded, grateful for her willingness to set aside the difficult conversations for now. He sat down beside them, his eyes falling on his grandson. Elliot looked up and gave a small giggle, holding out a toy truck to him. Marcus chuckled, taking the toy gently, feeling the warmth of the moment wash over him. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. After a while, Lila turned to Marcus, her expression growing more serious. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice quiet, "about everything, about you and me, and what this could be. I want you to know that I'm open to having you be a part of Elliot's life." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had never expected Lila to say those words, not after everything. He had only hoped for a second chance, a chance to make up for lost time. But hearing her say it aloud was something different, something more. It was an invitation, not just for him to be part of her life again, but to be part of his grandson's too. "You're sure?" Marcus asked, his voice thick with emotion. "After everything, are you really sure?" Lila nodded. "I am. I've seen how much you're trying. I can see that you want to be here, to be part of his life. And that means something to me." The words felt like a balm to the wounds that Marcus had carried for so long. He had been afraid that the past, his past mistakes, would stand in the way of this opportunity. But Lila was telling him that there was room for forgiveness, room for a new start. Marcus smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that felt like a release. "I won't let you down," he promised, his voice full of determination. As the afternoon went on, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The heaviness of the past, while still present, didn't have to define him. He could choose to focus on what was ahead, on this new role he was stepping into as a grandfather. Watching Elliot play and laugh, Marcus felt a deep joy that he hadn't experienced in years. There was something special about being part of a child's life, something pure and untainted by the complexities of adulthood. When he left later that day, Marcus didn't feel burdened by the weight of old regrets. Instead, he felt a sense of hope. He was beginning to build something meaningful, a bond with Lila, a connection with Elliot, and a chance to find peace in the present. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt like he had a reason to move forward, to embrace the future with open arms. As the weeks passed, Marcus found himself caught between the past and the present, walking a fine line between the life he had once known and the new one he was trying to build. He still thought about Claire often, her laughter, her warmth, and the years they had spent together, the secrets she had kept, the things he would never truly understand, still lingered in his mind. There were moments when he longed for answers, when he wished he could sit with her once more and ask about the things he'd never known. But as time moved on, Marcus began to realize that some questions might never have clear answers. He could spend his days searching for reasons, but in the end, those reasons wouldn't change the reality of what had been. Claire was gone, and the life they had shared, though meaningful, had its flaws, just like any other. He had to accept that, for his own peace of mind. One afternoon, Marcus drove to the cemetery, a familiar place where he had visited Claire's grave many times since her passing. It had always been a place of sorrow, where memories flooded back and grief overtook him. But today, as he stood before her headstone, something felt different. The ache of loss was still there, but it wasn't as sharp as before. In its place, he found quiet reflection. He knelt down, his fingers brushing the cold stone. "I never got the chance to ask you all the things I wanted to know, Claire," he whispered, the words feeling heavier than he expected. "But I've learned that some things are just not for us to understand." He paused, taking in the calm of the cemetery, the birds singing in the distance. In that moment, Marcus felt a sense of closure. He could never change the past, but he could make peace with it. As he left the cemetery, he realized that his grief for Claire had softened. It wasn't gone, but it no longer held him in a vice. He was ready to embrace the present, the family he had now, and the chance to build something new. Back at Lila's apartment, Marcus was greeted with the familiar sight of Elliot's laughter and the warmth of Lila's smile. These moments, simple as they were, had become his anchor. He wasn't just a grandfather by name, he was becoming part of their lives in a way that mattered. Each visit, each shared meal, and every moment with his grandson felt like a small victory. Lila had come to mean more to him than he could have ever expected. The walls between them had fallen, and the bond they were creating, based on understanding, forgiveness, and patience, was growing stronger each day. Marcus knew there was still much to learn and many hurdles to face, but for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. He had a family again, in a way he hadn't imagined. They were imperfect, just as he was, but there was a quiet strength in the love they shared. As he held Elliot in his arms one evening, feeling the warmth of the little boy's embrace, Marcus realized he had found something he hadn't thought possible. Hope. The future no longer seemed uncertain, but full of possibilities. The family he had once thought lost to time had returned to him in a new form, and Marcus was ready to cherish it. In that moment, he understood that while the past would always be a part of him, it was the present and the future that he could shape. And with that acceptance, Marcus embraced the next chapter of his life, grateful for the second chance he had been given.